in the summer of 1770. William Gilpin, vicar of Baldra near Lymington, travelled to South Wales and sailed the Lower Wye, from Ross to Chepstow. During this voyage, he wrote his guidebook, Observations on the River Wye and several parts of South Wales, in which he formalised his views on the picturesque. The idea of the picturesque was a popular one in the late 18th century, emerging as a backlash against earlier ideas of symmetry and proportion. Gilpin wrote many books on the subject and took many journeys. The routes taken by Gilpin were later followed by both professional and amateur artists. His recommendations were taken into account when sketches were made. Gilpin believed that artists could use their own license to make a view more picturesque by adding picturesque elements to a natural scene rather than sketching an artificial one. Gilpin's works helped so many people, including artists, to see the British countryside as picturesque for the very first time.
We travel for various purposes. To explore the culture of soils, to view the curiosities of art, to survey the beauties of nature. The following little work proposes a new object of pursuit, that of not barely examining the face of a country, but of examining it by rules of picturesque beauty. Observations of this kind, though the vehicle of description, have the better chance of being founded in truth, as they are not the offspring of theory, but are taken warm from the scenes of nature as they arise. The Wye takes its rise near the summit of Plynlimmon, and dividing the counties of Radnor and Brecknock, passes through Herefordshire. From there, becoming a second boundary between Monmouth and Gloucestershire, it falls to the Severn, a little below Chepstow. The first part of the river from Ross is tame. The banks are low, and there is scarce an object worth attention. The bank, however, soon began to swell on the right, and was richly adorned with wood. We admired it much, and also the vivid images reflected from the water. A disturbed surface of water, endeavouring to collect its scattered images and restore them to order, is among the pretty appearances of nature. We met with nothing for some time during our voyage but these grand woody banks one riffling behind another, appearing and vanishing by turns, as we doubled their several capes. The channel of no river can be more decisively marked than the Wye. A nobler watercourse was never divided for any river than this. Rivers in general pursue a devious course along the countries through which they flow. After sailing 4 miles from Ross, we came to Goodrich Castle, and we rested on our oars to examine it. The bank on the right is steep and covered with wood, beyond which a bold promontory shoots out, crowned with a castle rising among the trees. This view, which is one of the grandest on the river, I should not scruple to call correctly picturesque, which is seldom the character of a purely natural scene. Nature is always great in design, but unequal in composition. She is an admirable colourist and can harmonise her tints with infinite variety and inimitable beauty, but is seldom so correct on composition as to produce a harmonious whole. The case is, the immensity of nature is beyond human comprehension. She works on a vast scale, and no doubt harmoniously, if her schemes could be comprehended. The artist, in the meantime, is confined to a span. He lays down his little rules, therefore, which he calls the principles of picturesque beauty. Hence, therefore, the painter who adheres strictly to the composition of nature will rarely make a good picture. In the scenery, indeed, at Goodrich Castle, parts are few, and the whole is a very simple exhibition. As we leave Goodrich Castle, the banks on the left began now principally to attract our attention, rearing themselves gradually into grand steeps, unadorned, except here and there, by a straggling tree. At Lidbrook is a large wharf, where coals are shipped for Hereford and other places. Here the scene is new and pleasing. All has thus far been grandeur and tranquillity. It is now life and bustle. A road runs diagonally along the bank, and horses and carts appear passing to the small vessels, which lie against the wharf to receive their burdens. Close behind, a rich woody hill hangs sloping over the wharf and forms a grand background to the whole. The contrast of all this business, the engines used in lading and unlading, together with the solemnity of the scene, produce altogether a picturesque assemblage. The sloping hill is the front scene. The two side screens are low. The front soon becomes a lofty side screen on the left, and sweeping round the eye at Welsh Bicknor forms a noble amphitheatre. The various buildings on the banks of the Wye form the last of its ornaments. Abbeys, castles, villages, spires, forges, mills, and bridges. One or another of these venerable vestiges of the past, or cheerful habitations of the present times, characterize almost every scene. These works of art are, however, of much greater use in artificial than in natural landscape. In pursuing the beauties of nature, we range at large among forests, lakes, rocks, and mountains. The various scenes we meet with furnish an unexhausted source of pleasure, and though the works of art may often give animation and contrast to these scenes, yet still they are not necessary. We can be amused without them. But when we introduce a scene on canvas, when the eye is to be confined within the frame of a picture and can no longer range among the varieties of nature, the aids of art become more necessary. At Coldwell, the front screen first appears as a woody hill, swelling to a point in a few minutes. It changes its shape, while the front unfolds itself into a majestic piece of rock scenery. Here we should have gone on shore and walked to the new weir. This walk would have afforded us, we were informed, some very noble river views. Nor should we have lost anything by relinquishing the water. We left the rocks and precipices behind, exchanging them for low banks and sedges. From these rocks we soon approached the new weir, which may be called the second grand scene on the Wye. The river is wider than usual in this part, and takes a sweep round a towering promontory of rock, and is the grand feature of the view. It is not a broad, fractured face of rock, but rather a woody hill, from which large projections in 2 or 3 places burst out, rudely hung with twisting branches and shaggy furniture, which, like mane round the lion's head, gives a more savage air to these wild exhibitions of nature. On the right side of the river, the bank forms a woody amphitheatre, following the course of the stream around the promontory. Its lower skirts are adorned with a hamlet. But what peculiarly marks this view is its circumference on the water. The whole river at this place makes a precipitate fall of no great height indeed, but enough to merit the title of a cascade. In all the scenes we had yet passed, the water moving with a flow and solemn pace, the objects around kept time, as it were, with it. And every steep and every rock which hung over the river was solemn, tranquil, and majestic. But here the violence of the stream and the roaring of the waters impressed a new character on the scene. All was agitation and uproar, and every steep and every rock stared with wildness and terror. After we had passed a few of these scenes, the hills gradually descend into Monmouth, which lies too low to make any appearance from the water. But on landing, we found a pleasant town, and neatly built. The town house and church are both handsome. The transmutations of time are often ludicrous. Monmouth Castle was formerly the palace of a king and birthplace of a mighty prince. It is now converted into a yard for fattening ducks. As we left Monmouth, the banks on the left were at first low, but on both sides they grew steep and woody, varying their shapes as they had done the day before. The weather was now serene. The sun shone, and we saw enough of the effect of light in the exhibitions of this day to regret the want of it before. During the whole course of our voyage from Ross, we had scarce seen one cornfield. The banks of the Wye consist almost entirely either of wood or of pasturage. Furrowed lands and waving corn, however charming in pastoral poetry, are ill accommodated to painting. From Monmouth we reached by a late break the noble ruin of Tintern Abbey, which belongs to the Duke of Beaufort, and is esteemed, with its appendages, the most beautiful and picturesque view on the river. Castles and abbeys have different situations, agreeable to their respective uses. The castle, meant for defence, stands boldly on the hill. The abbey, intended for meditation, is hid in the sequestered vale. Such is the situation of Tintern Abbey. It occupies a gentle eminence in the middle of a circular valley, beautifully screened on all sides by woody hills, through which the river winds its course. A more pleasing retreat could not easily be found. Everything around breathes an air so calm and tranquil, so sequestered from the commerce of life, that it is easy to conceive a man of warm imagination in monkish times might have been allured by such a scene to become an inhabitant of it. No ruins of the tower are left, which might give form and contrast to the walls and buttresses and other inferior parts. Instead of this, a number of gable ends hurt the eye with their regularity and disgust it by the vulgarity of their shape. But if Tintern Abbey be less striking as a distant object, it exhibits on a nearer view a very enchanting piece of ruin. Nature has now made it her own. Time has worn off all traces of the rule. It has blunted the sharp edges of the chisel and broken the regularity of opposing parts. To these are superadded ornaments of time. Ivy, in masses uncommonly large, has taken possession of many parts of the wall, and gives a happy contrast to the grey-coloured stone of which the building is composed. Nor is this undecorated. Mosses of various hues with lichens, maidenhair, penny leaf, and other humble plants overspread the surface, or hang from every joint and crevice. Some of them were in flower, others only in leaf, but altogether they give those full-blown tints which add the richest finish to a ruin. Such is the beautiful appearance which Tintern Abbey exhibits on the outside, but when we enter it, we see it in most perfection. The roof is gone, but the walls and pillars and abutments which supported it are entire. A few of the pillars indeed have given way, and here and there a piece of the facing wall. The pavement is obliterated. The elevation of the choir is no longer visible. The whole area is reduced to one level, cleared of rubbish and interrupted with nothing. When we stood at one end of this awful piece of ruin and surveyed the whole in view, the elements of air and earth its only covering, and the grand and venerable remains, the eye was above measure delighted with the beauty, the greatness, and the novelty of the scene. Mr. Morris's improvements at Pursfield, which we soon approached, are generally thought as much worth the traveller's notice as anything on the banks of the Wye. We pushed on shore close under its rocks, and the tide being at ebb, we landed with some difficulty on an oozy beach. One of our bargemen served as a guide, and under his conduct we climbed the steep hill and gained the top. The eminence on which we stood is an intermixture of rock and wood, and forms in this place a concave semicircle, sweeping round in a segment of 2 miles. Sometimes a broad face of rock is presented, stretching along a vast space, like the walls of a citadel. Sometimes it is broken by intervening trees. And though many of these objects are repeatedly seen, yet seen with new accompaniments they appear new. We cannot, however, call these views picturesque. They are either presented from too high a point, or they have little to mark them as characteristic, or they do not fall into such composition as would appear to advantage on canvas, but they are extremely romantic and give a loose to the most pleasing riot of imagination. Having seen everything on this side of the hill, the walks we pursued led us to the ridge of it to the opposite side. The views on this side are not the romantic steeps of the Wye, but those of another species. They are equally grand. They are chiefly distances, consisting of the vast waters of the Severn and of the town of Chepstow and its castle and abbey. From the scenes of Perthfield, we walked to Chepstow, our barge drawing too much water to pass under the shallows till the return of the tide. In this walk, we wished for more time than we could command, to examine the romantic scenes which surrounded us. But we were obliged to return that evening to Monmouth.